So now we begin adolescence, and we'll start off again with the same pattern of with biosocial development of teenagers. It was an interesting time of what G. Stanley Hall called stress and storm. So puberty is the time between the first onrush of hormones and the full adult physical development. Usually lasts anywhere from 3 to 5 years and may require more years to achieve psychosocial maturity. So sometimes the biology is ahead of the emotional or psychological development. Menarche, or periods, the girl's first menstrual period signals that she has begun to ovulate. And of course, pregnancy is a biological possibility. But ovulation and menstruation are often irregular for years after the first period. Sperm arc, it's when a boy first ejaculates sperm. Erections can occur as early as infancy, but ejaculation signals sperm production. Of course, hormones are the driving force behind all of this. These are organic chemicals that are produced by one of the body's tissues, in this case the sex organs, and conveyed via the bloodstream to another to affect some physiological function. And of course, the pituitary gland is at the base of the brain, responds to signals from the hypothalamus to produce many hormones, including those that regulate growth in other glands, among them the adrenals and the sex glands, the ovaries and the testicles. So puberty begins with a hormonal signal from the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland in turn signals the adrenal glands and the ovaries or testes to produce more of the hormone. The adrenal glands are actually two glands located above the kidneys that produce hormones, including stress hormones, epinephrine and norepinephrine. The hypothalamic pituitary axis is a sequence of a chain of reactions of hormonal production originating in the hypothalamus and moving to the pituitary and then to the adrenal glands. The hypothalamic pituitary gonad axis, HPG, is the same sequence except it ends up at the gonads instead of the adrenal glands. And of course, this the biological sequence of puberty starts with hormones for both boys and girls. The surge of hormones affects bodies, brains, and behavior before visible signs of puberty appear. The gonads, paired sex glands, ovaries, and testicles produce hormones and gametes. Estradiol is a sex hormone considered the chief estrogen, and females produce more estradiol than males do, although males do produce some. Testosterone, the sex hormone, is best known of the androgens, male sex hormones, and is secreted in far greater amounts in males than in females. All of this is regulated by the X and Y chromosomes. So body rhythms, day and night cycle of biological activity occurs approximately every 24 hours. We call their circadian rhythm, circa meaning day, which affects hormones of the HPA axis, and puberty causing the phase delay in wake-sleep cycles, which affects the biological circadian rhythms and culture work, and teenagers increasingly sleep deprived with each year of high school. So in some ways, during the puberty, there's a vicious cycle of not getting enough sleep and affecting the hormonal axis. 3 or 4 of every high school seniors are sleep deprived. Even if they go to sleep at midnight, as many do, they must get up before 8, as almost all do, and then all day they feel tired. At age 11 or 12 is the most likely visible age of onset of puberty. The rise in hormone levels that signal puberty is considered normal in those as young as 8 and as old as those that are 14. Precocious puberty, sexual development before 8, occurs once in about 5,000 children, but the reasons are unknown why that happens. About 2/3 of the variation in age of puberty is genetic. Genes of the sex chromosomes have a marked effect on the age of puberty. As a rule of thumb, girls generally develop ahead of boys, and children who have relatively large portion of body fat experience puberty sooner than those that are thin in terms of their contemporaries. There are secular trends. Data on puberty over the centuries has revealed a dramatic example of long-term statistical increase or decrease. Each generation has experienced puberty a few weeks earlier and has grown a centimeter or taller than the preceding one. Secular trends have stopped in developing nations. Body fat, of course, influences the onset of puberty. Most girls weigh at least 100 pounds before experiencing their first period. Globally, urban children are more often overfed and underexercised than rural children. Leptin, of course, is a hormone that affects appetite and is believed to be involved in the onset of puberty. It increases during childhood and peaks around age 12 and evokes uncertainty about its effects. Stress, of course, arrives early in a child's life. When children have sick parents, addicted, or divorced, or they live in bad neighborhoods, it affects the children who are genetically sensitive to context. For girls who are genetically sensitive, puberty comes early if their family interaction is stressful, but late if their family is supportive. Several long-term studies show the direct linkage between stress and early puberty. It makes reproduction more difficult in adulthood and hastens hormonal onset in puberty. Not all scientists agree that stress causes early puberty, though. Keep that in mind. Early maturing girls tend to have lower self-esteem, more depression, and poor body image than later maturing girls. Early maturing girls may be attracted to older boyfriends and enter into abusive relationships more often than other girls. Early maturing boys are more aggressive, law-breaking, and alcohol-abusing than later maturing boys. Slow developing boys tend to be more anxious, depressed, and afraid of sex. Size and maturity are important for many adolescents in every nation. This just shows the cascade. A growth spurt is a relatively sudden and rapid physical growth that occurs during puberty. Each body part increases in size on a schedule. Growth is not always symmetrical, and weight usually precedes height, and growth of the limbs precedes growth of torso. The big difference, all children experience an increase in muscle during puberty, but gender differences are more apparent in some gross motor skills. This just compares boys and girls, with girls slower to react than boys are. The sequence is weight, height, and muscle. Height spurts follows weight spurts. Then a year or two later, muscle spurts occurs. Arm muscles develop more in boys, and other muscles are gender neutral. Organ growth, the lungs triple in weight. Consequently, adolescents breathe more deeply and slowly. Heart doubles in size, and the heartbeat slows, decreases the pulse rate while increasing blood pressure, and only lymphatic system decreases in size. In terms of skin and hair, skin becomes oilier, sweatier, and more prone to acne. Hair on the head and limbs becomes coarse and darker. New hair growth under arms and face and over sex organs, and in many ways, hair is more than a growth characteristic, it's a display of sexuality. In terms of dietary and nutrition, many adolescents are deficient in their intake of necessary vitamins and minerals. Deficiencies include iron, calcium, zinc, and other minerals, since these are needed for bone and growth and muscle growth. Nutritional deficiencies result from food choices that young adolescents are allowed, even enticed to make. You are what you eat. The body image is a person's idea of how his or her body looks. Girls diet partly because boys tend to prefer and date thin girls. Boys want to look taller and stronger, partly because girls value well-developed muscles in males. There are eating disorders that occur during adolescence, including anorexia nervosa, often just called anorexia. It's an eating disorder characterized by self-starving. It affects individuals voluntarily under-eating and often over-exercising, depriving their vital organs of nutrition. And anorexia can be fatal. It occurs far more often in girls than boys. Bulimia nervosa, often called bulimia, is an eating disorder characterized by binge episodes and then followed by purging, usually induced by vomiting, exercise, use of laxatives, diuretics, etc. It is not the same thing as binge eating disorder, which is a totally separate DSM-5 diagnostic group. Interestingly enough, bulimia nervosa can also cause fatalities as well. Often that person is noticed first by the dentist because of their purging episodes. In the DSM-5, they introduced binge eating disorder as a diagnostic group, in part to recognize that binging is sometimes associated with anorexia. It also was introduced partly because it was one way that psychologists and physicians could diagnose obesity as a syndrome. Origins of disordered eating tend to be cultural, especially the images that a culture promotes for teenagers. It can be caused by stress, the stress of puberty, hormones, and childhood patterns. Family patterns and eating disorders reduction can lead to healthier eating in childhood and eating together during childhood. So, in short, the family that eats together stays together. It reduces the number of people with eating disorders. Different parts of the brain grow at different rates. The myelin and maturation occur in sequence proceeding from the inner brain to the cortex from front to back. The limbic system, that primitive emotional center part of the brain that responds to fear and emotional responses, mature before the prefrontal cortex. And so they may have difficulty planning ahead and with emotional regulation. Some experts believe that emotional maturation doesn't occur until the early to mid-20s. Instinctual and emotional areas develop before reflective ones do. When emotions are intense, especially when one is with peers, the logical part of the brain essentially shuts down. When stress, arousal, passion, sensory bombardment, drug intoxication, or deprivation is extreme, the adolescent brain is overtaken by impulses that might shame adults and frankly get them into trouble. Several aspects of the adolescent brain development are positive. There's increased myelination, which decreases reaction time, and enhanced dopamine activity, promoting pleasurable experiences, and synaptic growth enhances moral development and openness to new experiences and ideas. So we have to take the good with the bad. This just shows some different brains using some imaging techniques. You can see that as a person ages from age 5 on the left to age 20 on the right, that it becomes fully myelinated, and the frontal lobes are completely online, as evidenced by the blue as opposed to the red. In terms of cognitive development, they're acutely aware of risk and reward. Neurological research finds that the reward parts of the adolescent brain are far stronger than the inhibition parts. So slow maturing prefrontal cortex makes powerful sensation desirable. Music, speeding cars, strong drugs, sex are compelling. Teens seek excitement and pleasure, especially the social pleasure of peer admiration. That's why things such as Facebook and other social media are so powerful. Many types of psychopathology increase at puberty, especially early in puberty, and these include especially anxiety and depression. Primary sex characteristics of parts of the body that are directly involved in reproduction, including the vagina, uterus, ovaries, testicles, and penis, are different than the secondary sex characteristics, which are physical traits that are not directly involved in reproduction. And they include, but what that indicates sexual maturity, like your shape, your hair patterns, and development of breasts and muscle mass. Sexual activity, boys are more influenced by hormones and girls by culture. So both are influenced by hormones, but society, biology, and culture are powerful. Percentage of U.S. 9th to 12th graders who say they have had sexual intercourse. The trends show over from 1990 to 2009, a period of almost 20 years, that the rates of sexual activity have gone down. problems less problematic than earlier decades, decrease in teenage births in every nation, the rise of the use of contraception or protection, and a decrease in teenage abortion rates. So making technologies available to kids has reduced pregnancies and sexual activity. Hazards related to adolescent sexual activity include early puberty and weak social taboos, encouraging sex at an early age. Early sexual correlates with depression and drug abuse, that is, kids that are more sexually active tend to have more emotional problems. Increasing complexity and expense are related to parenting. So how you're raised and affects how your attitudes about sexuality. It's more common and dangerous STIs. They used to be STDs, and they include genital warts, HIV infections, etc. Other issues that come up during adolescence include sexual abuse, which includes having sexual relation with a child that's underage. And it's the most common during this time period because not for pedophiles, but for hebephiles, it's the signal of puberty makes them more easily targeted. And of course, this happens not just in the United States, but all over the world. Some of the people that commit these sexual abuse to teenagers include family members. Victims are often isolated and uninformed. They're not really sure what's going on, although they don't like it. And the impact of sexual abuse is often continues on into adulthood. So intervention programs have proliferated over the decades to help teenage sexual abuse victims. And of course, sexually transmitted infections are a big issue. They include diseases spread by sexual contact, like syphilis, gonorrhea, genital herpes, chlamydia, and HIV. Worldwide sexual active teenagers have higher rates of most STIs. Well, that kind of makes sense. If you're more sexually active, the probability of that happening goes up. Early age of first intercourse, failure to use condoms, and hesitancy to report infections contribute to high rates of U.S. infection. So if you're not reporting it and using contraception, you're more likely to spread it around. Condom use just as a display across countries. So if you compare the United States at 41% to a place like Israel or Russia at 14 and 33, they're gaping holes. And then, of course, they also track who's used condoms in the last during their last sexual activity. This is 2010. Okay, so that's enough about biosocial development. Let's move on to cognitive development.